going back now. All right. Hello, Beacon Lounge. Just kidding.
Well done.
Thank you. My name's Brian Rich. I'm a writer and provoker, and thanks to even the Beacon Lounge folks, the sort of host of these Do Good dialogues, which just brings people together from different perspectives and different areas of expertise to talk about a variety of different subjects in and around kind of the social good conversation. Eilene, Zimmerman, why don't you introduce yourself, because you wear many hats, and I don't want to misprioritize the ones that you would want to be most known for.
I am a freelance journalist who covers startups and technology and small business, and I write primarily for the New York Times small business section, and I have a weekly blog on startups and technology. And I also contribute to other publications like CNN Money. I write for Crane's New York Business, Real Simple, Salon.com, Slate, a whole bunch of those. Christmas Science Monitors.
Excellent. So I think startups are held up as a model, if not presently the model, for the way that businesses should function. More nimble, more digital, sort of conceptually, if not actually, virtual in business, etc. What are some of, or the most compelling components of high-functioning, successful startup organizations that if we're going to embrace aspects of startup culture to apply to social good, we should be starting with those and not, whatever other chapter of the How to Be a Startup-like organization book that we might potentially read?
So I think some of the best things about being a startup are that they are very nimble in a way that they're not dug into their thinking. They have an idea, they start it, but they also have lots of mentors and they have a really supportive community. So if something comes up or someone says, this model that you're putting forth, it's really, it's not going to work, they're not so resistant that they keep moving forward with it. They'll usually pivot, I hate that word, or change in some way to make it work. I would say, that they're generally very creative about it, and there's this perception that the organization in a startup is a bit flatter. I think there's still a hierarchy of power everywhere, but it is so that you're not dismissing more junior people and their ideas, and everybody's kind of in the mix, so you get a lot of the best ideas hopefully rising to the top. And also I think there's the whole lean startup movement, which is, basically everything you do has to contribute to the bottom line in some way, whether it's producing what you're going to produce or making revenue or getting funding. So I think it helps keep costs down and startups be as efficient as they can.
So you mentioned mentors, and I sort of have a two-part question on mentors. One is, what are these mentors in the startup capacity providing mentorship around? Is it how to run a company and how to hire smart people and how to do things that have been done before? Or is it, finding mentors and people with experience to contribute to the actual creation of the idea and the company? Because my sense is, right, if it's a new and innovative startup, finding people who have experience that would translate to the new and innovative idea that they're trying to bring to market would be much more difficult to find than, say, people who have built businesses before from the ground up, and MBAs if you're not one, and lawyers if you're not one, and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of the mentors in the community, a lot of them provide encouragement, but they'll also do things like connect them. There's a ton of startup meetups, and there's these ecosystems in cities, even like second-tier cities, not necessarily New York or Silicon Valley, but San Jose, but Pittsburgh and Kansas City. Kansas is a great example. They have the Kaufman Foundation there for entrepreneurship, but they have a fantastic thing once a week called 1 Million Cups, which is spread throughout many cities now in the United States. But it's basically a networking group that meets once a week, and it's gotten very big there. There's hundreds there. And a startup will present for 6 minutes, and then there's 20 minutes of questions. And some of the people in the audience that are asking questions are saying things like, have you thought about your distribution channels? What are you doing for marketing? Who's helping you with, coming up with a logo? Why did you choose this color scheme? What about packaging? And those are the kinds of things that, you're right, maybe the widget that the startup came up with no one else has done before, but inevitably a business is a business, and you're going to have to come up with marketing and a logo and a distribution channel and a revenue stream, and you're going to have to monetize stuff. And there are lots of people with great ideas that can help startup founders who may be very young and inexperienced, or not so young and inexperienced, maybe they went to a different industry, help them. I heard a good story. One guy told me he has a startup called Auto Swappers, and it's basically like an online place to buy and sell cars, but there's no advertising. So dealerships put their inventory on them, and that's where they get their money. And he presented at a startup conference, and someone in the audience had sold a company in the auto space for like $150 million, and became this guy's COO 3 weeks later. 2 different generations, but he had, started out as a mentor, and a few weeks into it, they were like, "Hey, why don't you just come on board?" And that happens in a startup.
So the second part of the question sort of goes like this. One of the arguments I would make about the challenges that exist in the social good space is that the thinking that exists within the social good space is not the thinking that is needed to really break out of some of the established patterns, which is not to say that there aren't high-functioning nonprofit organizations or social good organizations. It's saying that if we shift the focus to outcomes and impact in a different way, we have a deficiency of people who
think like that.
Who think like that, because obviously if we had them, then we would have done it a while.
So we'd have more successful nonprofits. Yeah.
So how does, for example, the kind of cross-sector mentoring conceivably happen in the startup space, where you intentionally, reach out to something that is not so core to your immediate need, but you kind of understand that you got to have some input from some I don't know, maybe it's contrarian voices or something like that. Does that or does that not?
I don't, because I don't cover nonprofits as much, I don't know if it does. I do think what nonprofits do, and we did do a post on change.org, which is a company that is a nonprofit, but they definitely need to generate revenue to keep going. I think it happens on their board. I think they'll pick people on their board that are from the for-profit sector that can help them run the nonprofit. And you're right, with an eye towards a bottom line. It's easy to get a bloated bureaucracy in a nonprofit because you're all there for the greater good. But if you're spending a lot of what you're taking in on running the organization, then not as much is getting given out. So I think that that's probably one of the places they focus, is trying to build a board with a lot of expertise that can help them.
So I'm not asking you to think about this as someone who knows a tremendous amount about the nonprofit side per se, but I think almost every startup business today has a stated belief that they should be doing something that is also good for the world. Not entirely, but
some mission,
some mission, right? Some triple bottom line element, and obviously there are sectors like B Corps and things like that actually institutionalize that. As a sort of armchair and observer of the nonprofit side, what do the startups not understand? What do the for-profit startups not understand about the nonprofit side of things when they try to embrace doing good or having a mission that maybe come from the social good side? People could say, this is how you guys would not make it kind of worse for those of us who've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if I understand. So what I see with for-profit startups is that they do often want to have a mission, and they think it's really important. I think for them, a lot of it's important sometimes as part of marketing to show that they have a mission. But also, I think the founders you don't want to add bad stuff to the world, you want to add good stuff. But I do think sometimes the missions, like they'll think, well, we're solving a problem in this space, and sometimes I'll tend to think like, that's not really so much of a problem. Like it's different if you have a nonprofit that's working towards climate change, let's say, and then you have a company that makes something to reduce electricity consumption, or they're making something else but they have 1% back. Like, I think that's, the way they do it is they'll either have a mission that they believe is changing, is life-changing or world-changing, and maybe it's not really addressing what are some of the biggest problems where nonprofits, at least from my limited experience, seem to feel like they're going through the real big problems, whether it's climate change or poverty or domestic violence. And a lot of for-profit startups have a mission that's much more focused. We're solving a problem that when you want to go out at night, you don't know how far away the greatest barbecue place. That's a problem, but it's not going to save the world, so they'll give back. Yeah. But then you wonder, where are they sourcing, their lots of things.
Who knows, maybe barbecue will save the world. I think one of the biggest issues in the social good and for-purpose space is we have a talent gap. And a lot of the best and brightest choose to go to startups now, not to major institutions and corporations and big agencies or whatever. They choose to go to startups and not to go to for-purpose organizations. One of the arguments is money, but frankly, in my experience, you don't get paid that well in most startups. The prospect of great wealth exists
Right.
if you make it, but whatever. So what is it that is so appealing about working in these startups that you know that is such an attraction for talent right now,
As opposed to
going to an organization that might make it bigger, right? Might have a greater ultimate.
like they need a technologist or someone.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the things is that everybody thinks the startup that they're working for is going to be the next Google, so you think you're going to get equity in that company, and I do think there is a huge financial incentive. I also think it's kind of sexy to work for a startup in a way that it's just not, even though there's a lot of, I think it's really like cool now to be
It's not as
for
sexy to be
social
good as it is.
It's not as sexy to be for the social good. Like it's important, and I think that's why you have a lot of startups or tech companies that have this huge. I mean, Google gives a ton to charity. There's a huge tech giving component. But when you're at a party, it's much cooler to say you're working on some app that's going to help people. Mix the next greatest martini. Than I just think it's the way it is. What I see is. Especially, you're right out of college or out of grad school, and it's like, well, I'll do that, and I'll do this for a while, and then I can go work for a nonprofit or the United Way, or,
South by, there's a lot of discussion about different startups and the products that they're creating, the apps that they're creating, the types of behaviors that they're setting up, right? Sort of their business, like what they're in business to do, and whether or not that's the next big trend or blah, blah, blah. What, on a sort of systemic level, have you heard or are you seeing being talked about at South by Southwest that has kind of disruptive potential sector-wide? A couple years ago, it was women.
oh yeah, right.
Maybe it was last year, might have been the year before. Huge push.
Right.
There were not enough
Women in tech,
women in engineering, and a lot of energy got put into women who code and things like that coming out of that, and obviously for the better. But that was a sector-wide sort of
right.
disruptive conversation that reached a critical mass here at South by Southwest. Is there, a systemic trend or an institutional element that that's new or bubbling up that isn't just going to benefit one small slice?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Something that sort of everybody's going to end up having to, or going to want to, I should say, hire more of these or do more of that.
So I can tell you what I've seen, and of course I've seen a small slice of it, but I've seen one of the big trends here, which is wearable tech, and that doesn't seem like a social good thing, but one thing I did notice, and there is a lot of, the headphones that flip over and become a screen, and at the Accelerator Awards last night, there was quite a bit of that, or the motorcycle helmet that can protect you in all sorts of ways. But I did notice that there were quite a few companies with wearable technology for the healthcare. So there's an app that I wrote about called Wello that you can hold up on your smartphone for a few seconds, and then you can get a reading on your heart and lung capacity. You can find out your blood sugar level and stuff. And this is like all preventive. So if you see spikes every day for a few weeks, it's time to call the doctor. And I think there's another piece of wearable tech that's a wrist brace that has a cardiac monitor, and it isn't a healthcare thing, but it identifies you uniquely so that instead of a password for everything, you can protect, since we've been talking about security, you can protect everything. You wear the wristband, it identifies you by your heartbeat, which is unique, and then you're into everything. You don't have to worry about passwords, and also nobody else can get in. So I think they're using wearable tech in ways that are quote unquote disruptive. I think everybody says disruptive, and unless it's like fire, a wheel, like I don't really. But
fire, wheel, wearable technology. It's a natural trend.
Right. So I think sure there'll be an entertainment component, but I think there's a lot of good healthcare apps I think that are coming out in security.
And then last question, because you pay so much attention to startups and small businesses, I have to imagine that you walk away at various times going, I cannot believe they're not thinking about this, or please God, would somebody just figure out the answer to this? Because how could you be leaving so much on the table, or how could you be missing so much,
right.
and how could so many of them be doing it? What the blind spot is. So, we have this gathering at South by Southwest with all these
right.
extraordinary people. What question would you want to ask, or what topic do you think should be discussed? Because this crowd is going to produce an answer that you're not going to be able to produce at some other event where
right.
the diversity of minds and the creativity and the passion all of that is
Yeah.
so concentrated.
You know, I'd ask two things, and some of these things have been addressed, but two things that bother me a lot are, we all talk about everything being stored in the cloud, and almost every startup I talk to has cloud-based aspects. But the cloud isn't really up there. It's these giant server farms that are, using enormous amounts of electricity, and also they take an enormous amount of electricity to cool, because and there have been startups, I covered one a few years ago that developed a fan that goes directly over these giant servers to cool them rather than these enormous amounts of air conditioning and stuff. And I think that's going to be a huge environmental issue, and it's just getting bigger. We talk about it, but I don't see any concrete solution. I know there's server farms located by bodies of water, so you can use water to cool them, and then the other thing is something American Express is working on too, is financial inclusion for very poor people and low-income people, because these are people that transact everything pretty much in cash and also don't have the tools to save money and to develop a saving plan or a budget. And I wish there are some, but I wish there were more startups that aimed at that group, because they represent a huge percentage of the population, and there's billions actually, I just saw some statistic quoted, that don't have bank accounts. They have no, so these are people that we could really develop. So they use a lot of mobile phones, they could do a lot of mobile phone banking, cash transfers, and I wish we had more widely accessible tools for them.
Those are two great questions. All right, Eilene Zimmerman, thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you.